York Sports Tours is New York City's premier sports history experience. This multimedia tour ride takes you through time from 1776 to the present, sharing stories about how New York City sports has shaped society and culture in the city, in the nation, and in the world.
What we're trying to do with this tour is to, in an educational and fun way, show people why not only that New York sports matters, but that New York sports particularly has been at the epicenter of developments in American culture and society for really over 150 years. Every sport, from baseball, basketball, hockey, football, tennis, golf, you name it, something important that has happened in the world of sports, it's happened here in New York, and its impact is reverberated throughout the country and even the world.
And where are some of the places that they tour?
Well, one of our favorite stops, a stop that a lot of people have liked on the preview tours, is the 69th Regiment Armory, which is over on 25th Street and Lexington Avenue, which not only is a place where the Knicks played in the NBA Finals, but was also a staging ground after 9/11 for a lot of the victims. And the Yankees actually at one point went down to the 69th Regiment Armory to console a lot of the families there. That's one of the spots there. Another fun spot is 270 Park Avenue, which is now the home of an internationally famous bank, but at one time was the home of Harry Frazee, who very famously sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. And one of the things that we do on the tour is we tell these stories as our guests are riding around in our luxury minivan to explain, now it just looked like a big bank, and so what? What does that have to do with New York sports history? But if you scroll back and dig into, in effect, the archives, you could see how a lot of places around Midtown Manhattan have had an impact on New York sports history.
And we have the Yankees, you have Madison Square Garden. Oh my gosh, so much sports. I mean, New York, we really lead the way. We have the tennis, we have Billie Jean King.
We have Midtown Manhattan pretty much has had or seen everything when it comes to New York sports history. You mentioned tennis. West Side Tennis Club really was organized in Manhattan, and West Side Tennis Club is where the Open was held for many, many years until it moved to Flushing Meadow. You mentioned baseball. The first baseball game that really was played, as we know it, was played in Madison Square Park. And of course, not too long after that, Madison Square Park was diagonally across the street from the site of not the first, but the first and second Madison Square Gardens, where a lot of sports history as well took place.
And then after the tour, do people end up at Keens where we're at now?
After the 3-hour tour, people can come to Keens, and the idea is the end of tour, you sort of, a lot of tours you go, and that's the end of it. But what we do at the end of our tours, guests are invited to have lunch with or dinner with a New York somebody famous from New York sports history to talk about what they saw, their experiences, and we think it's a nice way to wind the tour up.
Oh, a wonderful tour. And then how do people get a hold of you?
We have a website. It's newyorksports.tours. If you go to newyorksports.tours or you go onto our website, we have a list of dates where there are tours that are available all throughout the summer. And typically we will accommodate parties of anywhere from 9 to 20 guests. It's going to be a lot of fun. The previews that we've run have all been very exciting. We've tweaked the tour a little bit based on the feedback that we got on the tours, and I don't think anybody's going to come out of these tours and not think that they learned something that they didn't know, and they had a lot of fun doing it.
And here in New York City, there's so much history, so much architecture, and the whole gamut.
On this tour, you'll learn about architecture, history, law, science. You're going to learn about sports too. And if this goes well, and we expect that it will, we are actually thinking of expanding the tour to Upper Manhattan and the Bronx, do a separate tour for that, out to Queens, into Brooklyn.
You have Washington Heights, because the camera guy over there is a runner, so you have the Armory up there, some of the greatest indoor track and field, Milrose games.
That's right, Milrose games were at the Garden for many years, now up at the Armory.
Yes.
Very exciting, and of course, Washington Heights, also the home of the original Yankees. That's where they started when they were the Highlanders, starting in 1903. You've got the old Polo Grounds there, where not only the baseball giants but the football giants played, and actually the Yankees played there for some time as well.
And talking about Yankees, I did a story with Arthur Richmond when he was alive, and he was a media director, and we won an award just on the history in his office of all the players and all the people who were in his wedding and everything else, and we won an award on that show. So there is so much history.
There's more history than you could pack into 3 hours, but we're going to start with 3 hours and see where we go from there.
So if you love sports, this is for you.
I like to think so, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
My question is, what kind of demographic do you think that this tour will most appeal to?
No, I think this one's working fine. The demographic that I think it's going to appeal to are basically teens and up, tourists to a large extent, but not exclusively. I think a lot of New Yorkers, Brian alluded to this earlier, I think a lot of New Yorkers will take the tour, like people who haven't taken the Circle Line all of a sudden discover, gosh, there's a lot about New York and they love the Circle Line for that reason. I think a lot of people will take this tour who are New Yorkers will find that there is a lot that they did not know that they will be happy to have learned having taken it. So I think demographic is anybody who's interested in history, whether they are sports or non-sports fans.
We had a comment, one of the guests on one of our preview tours, and I don't know if he meant it as a compliment or not, but he said, wow, this is more of a PBS tour than an ESPN tour. We took that as a compliment because we knew that the sports fan should enjoy it, but history fans have really started enjoying seeing this tour. We've had a few preview tours and a couple focus group tours to get that feedback.
Jerry, we have a question right here. If you could bring the microphone, thank you.
Well, I was originally going to ask the similar question about who your demographic was working for a tourist magazine. I was kind of curious the mix of tourists versus New Yorkers. So I think you kind of answered that question so far. But what I'm curious is, this is an incredible concept. New York City is the mecca of sports from around the world. Why do you suppose somebody hasn't done this before, and why isn't this kind of thing happening, you think, across the country?
Well, I'll start with the second question first, which why isn't it happening across the country, which is, I think, and you touched on it, is that there isn't a single city in the United States that has the deep history of sports that New York has. Why hasn't it been done before? I don't have a good answer for that. I can tell you that 30 some odd years ago, a good friend of ours, several of us up here, a guy by the name of Bill Shannon, had an idea for a sports museum. Didn't pan out. I worked on that with Bill for a long time, trying to get that off the ground. And when I said in my earlier remarks that I see this as a museum on wheels, I do genuinely see this as a museum on wheels. I think it is the kind of experience that people will go on and they will get, like I say, a feel. It's a history museum tour. People will get a feel for what it was like to live at a certain time, who the famous athletes were at a given time, and what it was like to live in New York at different periods in the past. I don't know if that answers your question, but that was the origin of it, is really sort of as a museum. Instead of building a big facility and having to buy a building and all that, we've basically taken a museum and put it in a van.
We have a question by the Yankee Monuments all the way in the back. Please, yes.
Our next question is from Lloyd Carroll.
Hey there. Question for Kevin. George, you can probably help. How often is the tour going to take place? Cost? Can one get off the bus? Is it strictly Manhattan? Do you go to the outer boroughs? So those are kind of
The first tour, and by the way, it has a nickname, New York Game Changers. It's all within Midtown Manhattan because there's so many stories to tell there. We do plan, if the first tour goes as we would like it to go out to the outer boroughs. When we say New York sports history, we're talking about greater New York. We see that from New Haven, Connecticut to Princeton, New Jersey. But the first tour, and you asked about getting out, yes, we've gotten out a few places. People are fascinated by the 69th Regiment Armory. which is one of the Knicks, really the original home arena, but a lot of other sports things have gone on there well. Mary narrates a video about the 69th Regiment Armory, and she ties in sports history to the fact that post 9/11, the Family and Friends Meeting Center was the Armory.
With us, Brian Cashman, who is the general manager, New York Yankees. Now, there is no place with a greater history than Yankee Stadium. Could you tell our audience a little bit about the history?
Well, obviously we're about winning and championships. Nobody's got more world championships in sports than the New York Yankees, so we're proud about that. But history also, there's two sides of the coin. No one's lost more World Series than the New York Yankees. People don't realize that. I feel like it's the lottery. You got to be in it to win it, and we've won more than anybody, but we've also lost more. But we've been in so many championship fights that we're very proud of that history. And we've had our stumbles, we've had our failures along the way. That's what life is about, trials and tribulations, and so our story is about success, mostly success, certainly some failure. But the one thing that we're proud about that you could always sell easily is that we stand for competing and always trying to win. And that's a proud testimony that George Steinbrenner put forth.
Oh, talking about George Steinbrenner, talk a little bit about his dynasty, and now his two sons have taken over. Yes,
well, George Steinbrenner is one of the most successful sports figures in history, sports owners in history. To me, he's a Hall of Famer. It's hard to actually buy. He bought the New York Yankees back in the 70s, and it's hard, like when you look at it, to improve upon something. The Yankees, with all their storied franchise, had nowhere to go really but down, but he took them to a whole nother level. He bought the team, added significantly to their trophy case, elevated them as even higher in a world brand, because our brand, the Yankee brand, is recognized around the world like McDonald's is, like Coca-Cola is. I mean, the Yankee logo is you'll see it in China, Japan, Latin America, everywhere. People are wearing Yankee hats. But since that time, he built a brand new stadium. He created the S Network. He just exponentially improved upon the history and tradition of this franchise. And
he was a character. He was always in the papers. Now the two sons seem a little bit more quiet, it seems like, maybe. Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. The boss was a man with a plan, and he wanted a certain way, and that was it. It was his way or the highway, and it was his way or get out of the way, and he'd run you over. And again, when the dust settles, you can't argue with the results. So it's somebody I worked with for a long time, and I was proud to do so.
Okay, and just to end this, Arthur Richmond was one of my great friends, and I did a story in his office of all the memorabilia he had up there and won an award. That's how much Yankee history is. But he always liked pitching. He stressed you needed some good pitching. Well, we don't want to get caught up in what I want to say, baseball, where wild card. Maybe we'd like to, you never know what will happen on that. But do we have any ideas on what's going to happen with pitching? Or?
Well, we certainly like to add to it. My job is to improve, attack areas of weakness. That's the job of the general manager, and improve upon the team you already have. And we're going to try to do that. And obviously, we have between now and July 31st to do so. And pitching certainly is the name of the game. I agree. So.
Okay, yeah, we want that, because this camera guy over here is a big Boston guy.
I'm sorry. Well, we have a big weekend this weekend. We'll see what happens.
You got to make sure we beat Boston.
Well, if I could control what's going to happen, I promise you I'd wave that magic wand. But instead, we're going to let these guys compete against another great team and see what happens.
Yeah, because listening to him,
I know.
we lose. Ugh.
It's tough. That's what makes the rivalries spectacular. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With this, Mary Carillo, and tennis is your number one. A matter of fact, we just had an interview with Billie Jean King, because World Team Tennis is starting.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about some of the history of sports and tennis.
Well, Billie Jean is a very close friend of mine. I leave for Wimbledon tomorrow. It starts on Monday, and Billie Jean King and her partner, Alana Kloss, and I share a flat. So I have been lucky enough to know Billie for about 40 years now, and she has been a great friend and a mentor, an advisor, a deep influence on my life. So I was lucky, because the first time I ever got involved in tennis, Billie Jean King, 1973, was playing Bobby Riggs, and I was sitting cross-legged in front of the TV, telling everybody else in my family to be quiet, because I had to see if Billie Jean King was going to be able to beat Bobby. And of course she did, and it made me want to be a professional tennis player. Yeah. And when I finally got to meet her and to know her, Well, you've met Billie. You know what she's like.
I do.
She is
and
a force
Ilana
of
Clark
nature.
was also there because she's like one of the heads of this World Team Tennis.
She is, and Ilana was a longtime commissioner of World Team Tennis. That thing's been going on for more than 40 years now, and it just reflects the great ideals that Billie Jean harbors most. Team sports, doubles is as important as singles. Men are every bit the equal of women, and vice versa. I mean, it's everything she believes in, and she's had a very deep impact on my life. Yeah.
And then how do we draw in more children, do you feel, into the tennis? I know that they also have a big juniors tennis league, and Citibank is now sort of funding or helping out.
Yes, it's a terrific push. And when I played professional tennis, it was in the late 70s, and it was sort of, to my mind, obviously we all think that the time when we played is a golden age. But for American tennis, Billie Jean King was playing, Chris Evert was playing, John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors, and I mean, it was unbelievable. I played World Team Tennis. I was a New York Apple. Yes, it was huge back then. And these days, Americans don't dominate tennis as much. The best junior players and professional players are coming from Europe, from South America, where tennis is a very big sport. A lot of Eastern European countries have great juniors coming out of there because they are so hungry. And we're trying to get back in the States that kind of hunger and ambition for the junior players. And so, again, someone like Billie Jean is always trying to push it in schools, with summer leagues, with fun competitions. And it would be a nice thing if all of us, the U.S. started producing great champions again. We've been blessed with Serena Williams and Venus Williams for a long time. But they're getting a little older, as are we all. As the oldest I've ever been, for instance. So yeah, that's the hope, is that the hunger for tennis and the fun of tennis comes through again.
And hopefully this sports tour will add some tennis in there.
I was lucky enough I grew up in Queens. I'm a product of this city.
Queens is the home.
I'm a chick from Queens, baby. And I got to go to Forest Hills as a kid. I got to play the U.S. Open at Flushing Meadows. I went to Madison Square Garden for the men's championships a year, and women's championships as well. This is a great tennis town. It's a great tennis town. The U.S. Open is coming up at the end of the summer. It shaped my whole life. I mean, it changed my whole life, my love of sports. For me, it was tennis, but New York Sports Tours will show just how many stories there are out there and how many great athletes came out of there, and how sports can really reflect and shape society.
Yes, and this
it's going to be
is
a fun tour.
A sports history.
It is.
Yes, and stories, beautiful stories about the making of the greats.
Yes, you should take the tour. I think you'd learn a lot. You'd enjoy it. It's a lot of fun, and it's very informative. It's fun stuff.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
With this John Starks, now you were with the New York Knicks, and that was some of my greatest times. Patrick Ewing, Oakley. Tell us a little bit about those years.
It was a lot of fun, those two guys, along with Anthony Mason, Derek Harper, Mark Jackson, Gerald Wilkins. I can go on and on. It was a fun time. We had a good time. A tough, hard-nosed team that kind of represented the city mentality during that time. So, it was just, special times during that time, because obviously the Yankees was doing very well as the Rangers was doing very well. So it was special.
That was a great period of time. Now, what do you think the Knicks need to do? I mean, it seems like they never bounced back after that time.
Well, no, I think, we hired a very solid coach in Mr. Fizdale, Coach Fizdale. And, I like Scott Perry, and what Steve Mills is trying to bring here is get back to that New York's roots of hard-nosed, aggressive defense, along with the offense game that you have to have nowadays. So I'm excited about this upcoming season. We just drafted a very good rookie in Mr. Knox. So I'm excited to see, what's going to transpire this year.
And tell us just a little bit of history on the New York Knicks.
Well, obviously, this goes back to 1946 when the Knicks was formed, and Sweetwater Clifton was the first African-American player that joined the Knicks. And Then we have the great championships during Clyde and Bradley days, and as well as Willis Reed and Earl Monroe when he came in '72, which was some great moments then. Then the league has started to evolve. The ABA got involved, and the game has changed so much from an offensive standpoint because the ABA brought in the three-point line, and there are ways of playing the game which are more exciting. And so then we get into the 80s where the Knicks was a very formidable team during that time. And I came here in 1990. We had a guy by the name of Mark Jackson who taught me about the game of passing the basketball. I can remember one time coming down the lane, and I didn't think he saw me. He hit me dead in my face with the ball. And I went up and told him, I said, I didn't think you saw me, but I know next time to keep my eyes on and my hands ready to catch that pass. And, we had a great run in 1994, and as well as in 2000 during the lockout season. And so 99, I should say, during the lockout season. And so we're just trying to get back to that, that level of play and that excitement that the Garden has always had, and really haven't left, be honest with you. Even during our downtimes, the Garden and the fans still come out and support us because these are hard New York Knicks hardcore fans, and we really enjoy that they're sticking behind us and giving us time to do what we need to do in order to, push this team to great heights.
Well, good luck there. I used to go all the time when you played. That was when I went the most.
Oh,
that
yes.
was just an exciting time. I don't care what.
It was an exciting time. The city was exciting. It was very electric.
So it's coming back.
Yes, it is.
You heard it here. We're
yes,
going to with the Knicks.
You heard it here first. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with us, Shep Messing, and this is soccer. And this is a great year for soccer because we have the World Cup right now, and it's even going to be a better year because in 2026 we'll be hosting it. But give a little bit of the history in New York of soccer.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I do love soccer, and it's an exciting time because of the World Cup going on now, and as you alluded to, the World Cup coming here in 2026. But for me, my history and involvement in the sport started here in New York City. I was born in the Bronx and kicked the ball around in the street at times. And it wasn't until I went to college when I found out I was good. And I was an All-American, and then I was on the Olympic team. And when I got back from the Olympic Games, I found out that there was a team called the New York Cosmos that had drafted me. And in a period of time, from that year until Pele came, and then Franz Beckenbauer, and then the greatest players in the world, we just captured the imagination of New York and the country and the world. And we're probably the most famous team in the history of the sport here. And I was just a kid from Bronx along for the ride, so it was all great.
And we fell short this year. What is it? Why do you think we fell short, and how can we, speed it up? Because we got to get better for 2026. Because we got to be in it that year.
Here's my message, because this is a team, the U.S. national team. If you think about it, we always think we should be at the World Cup. We've been there ever since 1990, never failed to qualify. But this year, Italy didn't qualify for the World Cup. Holland missed out on the World Cup. So we're in some good company of great nations that have failed. What happened to us, and I hate to say it, we got a little bit arrogant. We thought a little too well of ourselves. And we lost that really fighting spirit that symbolizes how the U.S. plays. So there is no reason we should have lost to Panama or Costa Rica. And I think we should have done better against Mexico. So it's our own failing. It's our own fault. We got a little bit older and a little too arrogant. And I think we've learned our lessons. So right now it's all about bringing in a new crop of young players. And that's what's happening at the moment. And we won't miss it again.
Is there any truth that when we practice when we're younger because of the concussions and whatever, that we don't hit the ball with our head? I don't know, somebody had said, see, I've been over in Africa and those Middle Eastern countries where, they start as little kids just bouncing off. And somebody said this to me recently, that it's a little later that we're allowed to hit the ball with the head.
Definitely,
Is that
definitely,
true?
definitely. The concussion protocol that really started, obviously, with the NFL and the brain trauma and injuries from American football, there is and there was a real concern about protocol for concussions. Then all of a sudden they found studies that showed in Europe heading a ball can have similar repercussions. So look, I have kids, I have grandkids, I prefer to be safe. I don't think there's anything wrong with preventing young boys and girls from heading the ball until they're a certain age, 14 or 15, and that's not going to hurt our ability to compete. This is a sport where if your feet reach the ground, you're big enough to play. So we've got to work on our ball skill, and I'm not worried that we're doing the safe thing when it comes to protocol for concussion.
Well, it's just something that I heard, and I had wondered about that. But we.
I'll have the ball.
But here we are in 2026. We got to get it going. Oh, will it be some of it in New York? Do we know? I would think that New York would be one of the places that hosts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what. There's no guarantee, but I'm already hearing from people that know that the World Cup final, where half the population of the world will be tuned in. I'm hearing that the final at the World Cup in 2026 is going to be right here in New Jersey at MetLife Stadium. And that makes sense. We're the capital of the world, and what better place to hold the final?
Oh, excitement, yes. And this is a sport, whenever I travel overseas and abroad, everyone plays soccer. This is the sport. And it's growing here. It's really growing here, I feel.
Especially if you travel. And look, I know the statistics, and there are more kids in the United States that play soccer than play baseball and football combined. There's no question it's surged in popularity, and it's bypassed the other sports. So you don't see them playing Little League baseball. You don't see as many kids playing football because of the injuries. Hockey and basketball are inner city sports. Not hockey. Basketball's inner city sport. Hockey, northeast sport. But soccer is universal. You could play in the suburbs. You could play in the city, and there's no doubt it's surpassing the other sports. So it's going to continue to grow.
Thank you. We're looking forward.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I'm Kristal Hart reporting from Keens Restaurant here in Midtown, New York. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and thanks for watching.